I'm live. I'm hardly ever live, so this is kind of a new thing. I wanted to bring Aston back after 6 years, so that's what's going on. Once he's here, I'll talk a minute about why, and then after that, I'm pretty much going to pass the mic. Uh, He'll probably be here pretty soon, but in the meantime, I do want to talk about some of the current events. There's been a lot of things. And I'm the type of person that I don't really want to go into current events unless it's consecutive stuff and I see a trend and I see that's where the culture is blending, where it's headed. But I shouldn't wait because I could have seen a lot of this stuff coming. Some things hit me by surprise. We're in idiocracy and some things just surprise me. The thing with the Just Pearly stuff, that has not surprised me. This is common sense stuff that people should have seen. Like I recently had someone ask me, and I haven't even responded to them yet, but they asked me what's so racist about what she's saying, and like in relation to her stance on reparations. And it's like if you hold on, let me pull up this comment because I haven't responded. It's under this one channel and this dude that's cool with her. So let me wow, I'm going to YouTube. I'm so unused to being live. Let's see. Grab you. Oh, I'm getting people responding about an Elden Ring comment. Let's see. Where is it? Where is it? Nobody today was a slave, knows a slave, or has experienced slavery. This is the same thing that she was saying. Then they talk about like how would you do it? I'm like people don't get unemployment checks and social security checks, and we didn't just get stimulus packages. You know how we do it. You know why how people would qualify. That's basic genealogy. But the first thing, nobody was a slave today. That's what I mean when I say that like this is like you should have been able to see this when she was trying to do the Kevin Samuels thing. It takes a special type of white woman to do that, and I wasn't really seeing that. But when you have new rules for black people, when you do the whole Bill Maher thing when it's black people, and you start asking questions that only apply to black people but don't apply to anyone else, that's racism. Nobody was a slave. Like Native Americans today had muskets pointed at them and had their land jacked. Like they experience the Trail of Tears today. And I always bring up animals because we don't do wildlife bills for just one generation of animals. Like or with and not to like dehumanize Japanese people by going to Japanese people right after animals, but we didn't give them reparations just for the sake of one generation. And matter of fact, we gave in the actual documents for that bill that I think that passed under Reagan, it also included their heirs. But anyhow, Aston is here. What is up? Me
How's
unmute
it
you.
going? Can you hear me? Can you see me?
You're a little soft, and I might be too. How am I coming in?
You coming in fine. Let me move the mic closer. How about that?
Yeah, you're cool now.
Okay.
So I was just killing time talking about current events, especially this Miss Pearly thing stuff, because I don't know how people didn't see that coming. I don't see how anyone could have not seen her as someone that was going to break bad because it takes a real rare breed of white women to do Kevin Samuel stuff and not have it turn into blame hood rats first. And I knew that was going to happen, and maybe I should go live so I could warn people. But
I
let's
don't know who
that
she is.
topic. It's beaten, but it's
I don't
not
know who
beaten
she
enough
is. I
because
don't pay
people should
attention
have
to the
known.
whole manosphere thing. I don't have time.
You say you ain't got time for the
Nope.
manosphere.
Nope.
I would if it was more relevant to me, but I think for the most part, as long as you have the three P's, personality, a paycheck, and some pipe, you'll do okay with women. And it seems like, if the manosphere can do that,
Yeah,
then
you
oh
know,
well,
no, I'm 50
yeah.
years in the game, so yeah.
And yeah, you seem to have a very happy marriage. I've seen some of the images. So
Thank you.
maybe you should drop some manosphere knowledge, because I tell people, I don't like, there's two things I have peeves against. I don't like, and I spoke to you a minute ago about this. I don't like the term Caucasian, and I don't like the two terms Black community. I prefer redlinia because
Yeah,
it's more accurate. And in redlinia, a good wife or a good husband is a prize.
yeah. I actually use the term ghetto, and some people get turned off by the word ghetto, but I like to use the word because of the context of Jewish people and how they were put there, um, and it was government sanctioned, right? Not through their own will. They were in those conditions, and it was ethnically based, and created just for them against their own will, and it's something that you like put into, not something that you build yourself.
Yeah.
So that's why I use the term. I think it's pretty appropriate.
Yeah. If you have 5 to 10 good neighborhoods out of hundreds, it's not, I don't think community works, ghetto works. I'm going to sprinkle that in too. But community to me is an online thing. And that's one of the reasons I wanted you to come in and kind of edify people on how to further themselves. Because like I mentioned earlier when we were talking, when we're discussing the populating of ancient regions and the ethnicities and how they would have appeared back in those days, it's almost all true Negro, and it's kind of hypocritical because you never really have true albino for Rome and Greece. But to move past that, since you have so many content creators, and teach a generation on like speaking of manosphere, like, because there's a lot of employment opportunities once you move past this. And it when you're dealing with the mundane conversations, it also shields you when you have the big picture, instead
Hmm.
of, because otherwise you wouldn't see so many people jump right into the same back and forth true Negro nonsense. I've done it. I've done it too much, and I've learned, like, wait a second. I always ask people, do you hold Rome to the same standards? Because I see a lot of images of Romans who look like Black people today,
Hmm.
but I don't necessarily. I've never been like one of the people who said, "Yo, Rome used to be black." Yo, like, it was always like, "Damn, they got their share of black knights in the like when you look at I forgot what they were called, them Roman specialty knights." But anyhow, let me pass the mic. It's all yours.
Oh,
Please add to the intro what I missed.
um, where do I start? I ultimately have a criticism of the whole Afrocentricity, Black Egypt, and a lot of my criticism revolves around one, people not reading and actually doing the work, and a lot of that revolves around not reading sources, bad standards of evidence, and really not being a good steward of the people that came before us, right? So people want to talk about Cheikh Anta Diop and Obinga and UNESCO 50 years ago, and you can go online and see people making YouTubes about that, like within the past month. And for me, it's like, why make a video about what someone did 50 years ago or what Herodotus said thousands of years ago when there is scientific data that you can talk about, that was dug up 2 years ago, that either supports or disproves what they said? And that new information is what people should be talking about. Those old books, nothing wrong with those books. I have some of those books here, but those old books were, based on certain evidence, and ideas of that time. And now we are in the genomic age, and it should be quite clear for people that are paying attention that what we think of as race is not tied to DNA, um, at all. That's like pseudoscience. And race is a social construct, and what I believe is black and white is different from what other people believe is black and white. And so to argue about, is X population black or white, and then try to use science, you're starting off from a non-scientific social construct in the first place. And all that stuff needs to be pushed to the side, and then we can just talk about science. And people are not doing that because people are lazy, and most people haven't read books out of high school or college, and this is where we are. And I don't think the people, the pro-black people coming into the space are building upon what happened 50 years ago. No, they're just parroting the same stuff from 50 years ago. And then they're trying to argue against other people who are in the genomic age and talking about DNA from fossils and skeletons. And it's not a pretty sight. So that is my criticism. And most of the pushback I get is from people who don't read and don't really know anything. You know, Perfect example, I'm having a conversation on Facebook. They were saying this population looks like that population. I'm like, okay, are you basing that on skulls? And he's like, well, round it. Well, okay, well, show me the data. And they can't show a source. Like, you've never been in a conversation where you made a claim and someone asked for a source. What are you basing your opinion off of? Oh, there's tons of evidence. Okay, show me. I know there's tons of evidence. I don't need you to tell me there's tons of evidence. I need you to know how to go out and get a source and read it and give it to me to prove what you were saying. Anybody can make a claim, and a lot of videos are just claims. It'll be a 2-hour video of just claims, not one source. And we have to get away from that. So that is my introduction. 42, the ball is in your court.
Well, you can keep going. I mean, I one question kind of did come up with that. And the other two questions I have about the Boris paper. I don't like a lot of times I don't even know how to name these papers, usually just by the lead researcher. And I don't know if it's somebody named Boris, but since the link starts with Boris, and that paper in relation to the origins of the Anatolian farmer ancestry.
Mhm.
And but one thing did kind of come up when you mentioned that people they'll have claims, they might have images, but they won't have sources. And I wonder, like, because there's two areas where I think you could really get sources, like with especially if you're going to use DNA. You have studies like the ones I mentioned, but I wonder, like, do we ever get anything where you'll have lip service from Egyptologists where they'll talk about the African origins of Egypt, but then they get kind of vague, and then they seem to like they'll they'll fall into the whole thing. Well, you have fetishes here and you have fetishes here, and I'm like, damn, that sounds kind of like me. I'd be like, why does this Benin fetish look just like the fetish in Egypt? But are there Egyptologists that are actually going into like the cultures similar to Benin
Yeah.
and and linking it like that? I mean, is that just like
Mm,
Afrocentric scholars on the continent? Like, is anybody going much deeper than surface appearances?
to Benin, there's one to Benin. No, not that I know of. Not that I've read. Um, a lot of people give. I don't say a lot of people. A lot of people in the I don't want to read camp will use an excuse of saying, Egyptology is Eurocentrism. And in my opinion, Egyptology is like a check and balance to what is, um, real and what is not, right? a real bird that has wings that will fly, or a peacock that kind of looks good, but the wings are not of any use and the feathers are useless. They look good, but no. And Egyptology is about what they dug up, when they dug it up, specific cultures, and archaeological excavations. This is the data. And they talk about how the data is, we have this specific pottery culture, and it's found here, here, and here, and it's sort of spread all around the Sahara. Do they tie stuff like that specifically to Benin, or even West Africa? Not that I have seen, but you would have to do the work and sort of make the conclusion yourself. For instance, the mummy ginger, the Jebelin mummies. A lot of those mummies were found to have sickle cell. And not only do they have the lesions on the skeleton, which is sort of similar, you can have that due to anemia from malnutrition, and they find this all around the world. But they actually have DNA, where they sequence the DNA of some of these pre-dynastic mummies, and of course the specific section dealing with HBS band, boom, they have sickle cell. And sickle cell is a West African trait. Does that mean these people came from West Africa? No, it doesn't mean that. But it means that people were nomadic, and for whatever reason, these traits went from all the way over here to over here. And it's similar to the skeleton, um, Tafarolt in Morocco. The paternal lineage is EM78, which is thought to be Egyptian, and the highest frequencies are in the Nile Valley and the Horn of Africa, and it's thought to spread from there. But here we have this lineage, 15,000 years old, all the way over in Morocco. So now they're saying this lineage may have come from the Northwest. And so, we could see how lineage can come from the Northwest and end up in the East, just how sickle cell can come from the West and end up in the East. But you have to do the work. And some of these books are, it's not like sexy. It can be boring. People don't want to sit around read about pots and skeletons and cows and stuff and stones and arrowheads. No, they want the glamorous stuff, and you don't get that. You have to read boring books. But if boring is interesting, then you like it and you enjoy it. I can show you one of these boring books that I'm reading right now. Archaeology, the first farmers and herders in Egypt, new insights into the Fayum, Epipaleolithic, and Neolithic. And so it talks about um, the first people who practiced agriculture in the Neolithic in northern Egypt. Interesting stuff.
What
Question.
what's the author for that?
The author
I
is
think
a
I just
Japanese individual, Noriyuki Shirai. And a lot of this stuff, and books like this, in essence, are a collection of this person's published works, right? So you have a book like this, and all the stuff they publish in peer review, stack it, and boop, it's more than that. But some of the stuff in this book, you can go on Google Scholar right now, type in their name, you'll get it. Another book, this is one I actually suggest for everyone who says, "Oh, what book can I buy?" Get this one, The Archaeology of Africa, Foods, Metals, and Towns. Um, and again, it is a book with peer review, and it talks about everything, all the food, domestication, the earliest dates, where it happened, the animals, where it happened, the metals, where it happened, and towns being built and where it happened. And it's deep and goes into linguistics, all types of stuff. I have a bunch of books I could go through and sort of, here, I'll give you an excerpt, right? you go online and you say, you ask an AI, or you Google search, what is the oldest farming in Egypt? It's going to talk about, the Badarian and Nakata too, and something 6,000 years ago. But if you read a book, or if you're familiar with the information, it will show you something like, you look at my highlights. Let me read this a little bit. Talk about the southern border of Egypt in the last decades have revealed that pottery had emerged, and attempts of domestication of indigenous aurochs, cattle, might have begun in this region no later than the 8th millennium BC. So we're talking about 10,000 years ago. This pottery bearing pastoral culture was actually quite widespread from the Sudanese Nile Valley to the Libyan Sahara, hence has been recognized as a distinct Saharo-Sudanese culture in the early Holocene. And it talks about these people and that culture being the first potters in Egypt, and the first herders, and the first agriculturalists, with the millet and sorghum that they grew, which is found a little bit earlier in central Saharan sites in Libya. So, when we want to talk about what a population looks like, you have to know where they came from. And in order to know where you came from, you have to look at archaeology, because you may not have skeletons. You may only have pottery and stone tools, but you can sort of see the movement from A to B to C, and then they end up here. And that, archaeology in lieu of genetic results that you don't have, it tells you a lot. It
What?
tells you a lot. And that little bit that I read, a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what year is that book? Because I don't know if I've ever heard um it described as being that recent.
Let me see this
Because
book.
I like I mean, like cattle
2010.
domestication. Wow.
2010. Right
Okay.
now, cattle domestication. And we'll say something about domestication. The technical term domestication, they're talking about the physical and genetic changes in the plant or the animal that makes it markedly different from the wild ancestor, right? So people in Africa were herding cows, you know, 11 to 12,000 years ago. They were pinning them, like the evidence is there. Were those animals wild, or were they domesticated? You have to find the bones, you measure and say, oh, you know what, this one looks a little big. It was probably wild. So they're not domesticated. So that's one way, you have to know how they're using the term, and how you'll see some dates, 11,000 years ago. Then you see other dates that are like 8,000 years ago. So sometimes they're talking about the actual activity of pastoralism. Other times they're talking about the physical changes in the animal that classify domestication. But it
Um,
is quite old.
I, this kind of reminds me of something that I mentioned on Smash Rockwell's channel, that we don't credit hunter gatherers enough for inventing farming, because it wasn't a overnight process. I mean, I know you got some bigot internet trolls who will say that, like, Africa had no clue when the Levant came over, and they brought that. But I mean, you had sorghum grains, like a report of sorghum grains being ground up like 50,000 years ago or something like that.
Right.
Like, any hunter gatherer is going to have a range of land, and on that land, they're going to notice that the things that they're gathering have seeds,
Yep.
and it's not going to happen overnight if you try to domesticate them. And you might fail, and someone else years later might pick up from your examples, or you might take something from someone else. So it's a long, arduous process. But
Hmm.
once they did it, that we then don't credit early farmers for being far better at it than almost everyone is today, because we're not doing it unless
That,
you're a farmer.
and you know what else? The reason I bought this book is because when you look at the older populations, right? There's like this myth that you needed outsiders to come into Africa to teach Africa's stuff, dynastic race. And Badarian and Nakata was like, can I swear on here?
My channel isn't that big, and I don't have any recent strikes.
Okay.
Speak your mind.
Nakata and Badarian is the shit, and this is when everything started, and blah blah blah. And you have to be comfortable enough with this data to admit that people came from outside of Africa into Africa and they brought stuff. You know, this whole, like, the people in this space can't even, they're not even comfortable with that. So they're like argue, no, like, no, people, sheep and goats have wild West Asian ancestors and they came into Africa and Africans adopted it. Like, it is what it is. Don't be butthurt about stuff like that. And so those animals did come in, and Egypt got an entire agricultural package from the Levant: barley, wheat, lentils. I can't name them all, flax, but they got a number of things and they grew it in, whatever. But the passage I wrote and the people that they're speaking about, that was, 3,000, 3,500 years prior to Levantine agriculture entering Egypt. So Egyptians and the people in Egypt already were growing food. They already had animals and they knew how to do everything they did, technology wise. They didn't need influx to come in to jumpstart things. And you have to bring up those older populations, because if you search online for, the peopling of Egypt or this or that, they always start in the Neolithic when that stuff comes in. And it gives you a false impression that the people there didn't know anything and needed some other people to come in and teach them how to farm or teach them how to herd. And it is false. So, but you only know that if you read books or you read publications.
I notice people are definitely more comfortable with saying chickens and horses came into Africa because they,
Because it's so late, right? And
yeah,
camels, it's so
yeah.
late. But like, it is what it is. It is what it is. Donkeys left Africa and went all around the world.
Yeah, and
I'm comfortable enough reading the information where I can just read it for what it is. I'm not trying to see, figure out what I want to see they found. No, I want to see what they found. And that is what they found. And the dates on something like that, um, I was listening to a lecture from a Polish team that is in the Western Desert, and they have an upper bound date of 9,000 years ago for sheep and goats in Africa. That was surprising. I knew the dates of like 6,000 BC, but they pushed it back another 1,000 years. And we can argue over if it's actual Levantines coming in or if it's trade. But what I always say is, events like that provide opportunities for gene flow, whether it happened or not, whether Africans got the sheep and goats and the agriculture on their own terms. Who knows? I wasn't there, but that's the opportunity for gene flow. And when you're looking at, you know, when admixture could have happened, those type of events are, good to see in archaeology.
um, with what do you think about dogs? Because I mean, th- dogs are interesting in the sense that we were originally told that they they came from the European wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And that has definitely shifted because now we see that dog haplogroups are pretty much Africa has all of them. They might not have them all in high frequency, and we also see that the wolf is more of like a sibling
Mm-hmm.
to modern dogs. So seeing how certain primates, non-human primates, I got to clarify that, domesticate dogs. I'm thinking that dogs were might be like fire, like it predates Homo sapien. Have you heard
I
anything
haven't
about
researched
that?
dogs.
Okay.
Can't speak on it. I
'Cause
don't
I've
know.
seen a baboon domesticated dog, not much unlike we do today. Like they'll take some puppies and they'll be guard dogs for the other baboons and so on and so forth.
But a
Um,
question: are those tamed wolves, or are they actually domesticated dogs?
I think they were like African wild dogs, which in some ways are awfully hard to domesticate. But if
You can try.
yeah, they were doing it. Like,
I don't know. I don't know anything about that,
yeah,
and I don't speak on things I haven't read. I'm real good at that, saying I don't know. A lot of people don't want to say they don't know.
because I wonder, like with what you have read, they're including animals that are more related to farming and just kind of no, ignoring the ones that are more related to garden the farm. Because I haven't seen much information on it except for the study on dog haplogroups, and that didn't really draw much conclusions outside of like XY man was like, see, like Africa has. They're saying that I think the narrative might have been that they didn't originate in Africa or didn't make the claim, but the raw data suggests that um, except for there was a lineage in dogs that was similar to the correlation between Fulani and um, I think Inuits, how they have like a distant
I
relationship.
wouldn't even know what that means.
All right.
One population is here, the other population is way over there. I would,
Yeah, that's kind of how it was. It's like it even did. That kind of reminds me of like the how you'll have the Levant and Benin sickle cell. It's like, but you
you
don't
know,
have, like, if you do an ancestry test and you eliminate the middlemen, then you'll see Levant ancestry in Nigeria and Nigeria ancestry in the Levant. But if you don't eliminate the middlemen, you typically don't see it in most ancestry tests because they only go back 300 years and they weren't having sex 300 years ago or less. So that's kind of what it reminded me of with dogs, is that there may be a wing that that came into Africa from the outside, and but it might just be the big time North African breed. But one thing I will say for Europeans is I see why people think that they domesticated dogs, because they've created so many exotic dog breeds,
hmm
and just Eurasians in general, where Africa, I think, like the Atlas Mountain has a husky breed that might be native. I don't know. And other
hmm
than that, it seems like when you look at African dogs, they all look alike. And I know I'm wrong. I know there are exceptions, but like, and this is when I'll shut up because I'm like you. I won't talk about what I don't know. But that is the general impression that how,
they do
they
all
kind of
kinds
look
of,
alike.
not the
Yeah.
wild dogs, but the the dogs that people have, the street dogs. I mean, they are like all mutts, right?
Yeah.
And stuff like that, in my opinion, you just sort of shelve. You know, I'm okay. Pre-dynastic money with sickle cell. Let me think about that and put a pin in it. And when the connections come up, then I can be like, oh yeah, okay, I see how this happened. Maybe those are the ones that brought pottery to the Nile Valley, right? Remember, for the longest time, the oldest pottery was in Mali, and then they have the sites in Sudan that are equally as old. Are they older? It goes back and forth. 13,000 years. I wouldn't make that argument, but maybe,
Conceivable.
maybe.
Um, what do you think, like, as far as like archaeological and population genetics studies, what do you think people are really missing? Because I've seen you talking to people who aren't internet trolls. They're really speaking Arabic consistently on Twitter, and they'll have some stuff that I struggle to find online, or if I do find it, it's brand new. It's just coming out.
Well, first thing everybody should do is sign up for Google Alerts. The people that produce this stuff and these studies you read, whether they are genetic or archaeological, you sign up for Google Alerts with their name. And when they publish something, you will get the email, right? Academia.edu, create a profile, put the keywords and stuff you want to see, and you will get emails, too many emails every single day. Like, hey, do you want to read this? Do you want to read this? If I go to my email right now, I have all the academia edu stuff going into a folder. There are 900 items in there, the last of which Iron Age Senegalese populations, craniometric approach in historical perspective. Do I want to read that? I click it and view the PDF. Straight to your inbox. Information straight to your inbox. And you curate it so it's stuff that you want to see. You can read one of those a day, one over lunch. So that is one way, and one of the bullet points I was going to talk about is being, science is constantly changing. And you can grab a book. Um, where's my Diop book? Civilization of Barbarism. You can grab, you can read the PDF at UNESCO with Obinga and Diop, right? But there are sites that didn't even exist 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. They're digging up stuff right now. And if you're really interested, you should read about that stuff. You should know about that stuff. Um, like, is it can be hard, but the newer data puts older stuff in context, right? 50 years ago, 30 years ago, they didn't even have DNA. So you're looking at skeletons, you're looking at Olmec skeletons saying these could be Africans. Look at them, look at the nose, look at this, blah, blah, blah. Now, fast forward, now we are in the genomic age. We've tested hundreds of skeletons from the Americas, and we have not found in African in the pile until, into the 1500s, colonization. Got skeletons that look like us, test them, they're related to Native Americans. So knowing this with this new information, why would you continue to make that old argument based on outdated ideas of craniometrics? Either you trolling or you grifting. That is why we have to keep up with new information.
On that note, I did want to ask because, like, usually when I hear people talking about the African presence that predates Columbus, the only evidence that I know of, so maybe you can give some feedback on this, is the thing that Van Sertima and others, even like some white folks would say, is that Columbus reported seeing what he thought were African spears and testing them and saying that they were similar to what's found in Guinea. That's one, and the other one is the story. I think it was from a Arabian historian who talked about Mali sending a ship.
Avi Bakr?
Yeah, and that's about it. And I will say one thing, it was definitely doable because the I've seen the boats that
Yep.
Pacific Islanders uh where the Hawaiians, how they supposedly came based on their history, they came from Tahiti,
Mm-hmm.
and before Tahiti and all that, that was a hell of a trek.
Mm-hmm.
If you got lucky and you had an idea of where the jet streams were, a trip from Africa to the Americas would have been easier.
You could do it. You could do it. The question is, and this is where another one on bullet points: standards of evidence, right? How did Columbus hundreds of years ago do some type of analysis on gold spears? Did he have like an electron microscope?
I'm thinking he did some Game of Thrones shit.
It's,
Like he took it to the
right,
Grand Meister.
right. It makes no sense if for a person that understands archaeology and even knows what that would look like, right? A lot of I've seen charts where the Central American, South American populations wiped out like 95% due to disease, particularly um, smallpox. You know where smallpox comes from? Africa,
Yeah, created the
right?
vaccine.
How are right? The what was his name? Asti, the guy in Boston.
I forget. Um,
There's a story about a slave in Boston because Africans knew about smallpox because it's from Africa and they knew how to treat it. And so the Ozymandias, I can't say
yeah,
his
yeah. It's like starts with
right.
one on
He
C.
is telling his master, like, hey, I know what to do. You Boston's having his outbreak. I know what to do. You know, the master didn't believe him, so he starts inoculating the slave. You take the needle, pop the pustules, and bing, 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 bing. That's actually the basis of our inoculation today, right? And so he did that, and of course the Africans are not getting sick. Everybody else is getting sick. You know, oh, they wisen up. Okay, okay, yeah, poke my arm, and then before you know it, you save the town. So how are Africans going back and forth to the Americas for thousands of years, and they know about smallpox, and they're living among Native Americans, and then all of a sudden Europeans come over with smallpox and will wipe out all the Native Americans, even though they've been living with Africans who know about smallpox. And some of the people there are Africans who know how to treat smallpox. Doesn't make any sense. Number two, why would Africans be going to the Americans and have nothing to show for it? I don't know what Italians were cooking before colonization, but it didn't have anything with tomatoes. Tomatoes come to the Americas. Corn, Americas. Potatoes, Americas. Most of the peppers, Americas. These are American domesticates that did not exist around the world before colonization.
Wait,
If Africans were
tomatoes.
going to America, yep. If Africans were going to the Americas before colonization, you would see corn in Africa. You would see potatoes in Africa. You would see all that stuff in Africa, right? We have sheep and goats from West Asia, an entire agricultural package from West Asia in Africa, starting 9,000 years ago. And that stuff made it over to West Asia. They had goats. They didn't take any goats to the Americas. They didn't take any sheep to the Americas. They didn't take any cows to the Americas. They didn't take any of their grains to the Americas. They didn't take watermelon to the Americas. They didn't take okra to the Americas. They didn't take nothing to the Americas. They didn't take rice. They didn't take nothing. All that stuff arrived over there when the slaves came over there. That's when it got there. If Africans were going back and forth, you would find that stuff there. You would find that stuff in archaeological deposits in Africa. You would find that stuff in archaeological deposits in the Americas. You would be digging, from 200 BC, and you would find, African sorghum. You don't find that. Why? Because they were not there. That's the type of evidence you would need to show they were there. What did Africans invent in West Africa? Metallurgy. That helped them, the Bantu conquer, not conquer, but spread throughout the whole southern half of the continent. They went over there and they didn't take any metals. And when the Europeans showing up, they was fighting people with stone tools. But y'all been trading with Africans for thousands of years. Doesn't make any sense. Like that kind of stuff, and people that say that kind of stuff, those people don't know anything. They don't know what the evidence would look like. They're not really interested in the argument. They're just repeating what they heard from somebody, and that person is, repeating it from someone that wants you to buy their book. It's a
Yeah,
grift.
I'm. I mean, The only thing
Get the drift.
I've always said is if it happened, it was a clandestine thing, and the people didn't come back, and they were like, "Yo, it's dangerous." They didn't come back.
That, or how about this? This is one thing I say. Perhaps it happened, but we have not found Africans in the fossil record in the Americas before the 1500s. That's
Well,
it.
if it was like a few boats of people, we probably ain't gonna find that, and that's why I'm
If we
like,
were
why are you
special,
pushing it? And it goes back to, yeah, is it a grift?
and the problem is though is the skeletons that they're saying with are us have already been tested. So it's like, no, you got the skeleton that looked like us and you tested and it's not us. Game over. White
Yeah,
people did that with Kinnemek, man, in Washington. Oh, look at the skull. He's Caucasoid. This is us. And Native Americans like, no, he's ours. This is our family. Fast forward 10, 15 years, they test the skeleton. He's related to the Indians right down the street. Like, duh.
it does make you wonder though, and this kind of goes back to like what I was saying about the early population of pre-dynastic Egypt.
Mhm.
If you can have that much of a range and diversity, where people are thinking like this is Australoid or
Mhm.
Negroid, and then it may be, but it's not necessarily like it's far removed from them genetically. And then they did the same like with
Got it.
Caucasian and Kimblick man.
Got it. You got it.
Yeah.
So, so,
Like what like how diverse could Egypt have been if they're not that far removed from each other genetically?
so this is the destruction of the DNA equals race model. And people don't want to give this up. And that is why they have not progressed. You have people that look like Africans from Senegal to India, all along the southern route into Papua New Guinea, Australia, Fiji, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you get living populations that still look like that. Living people. White nose, nappy hair, dark skin, you look like you belonging in over with those people. But of course, they are genetically far removed. And for people that don't understand this, think of this being Africa, this being the other people that somewhat look like Africans in the West Pacific, and a bunch of populations in the middle, right? So these people over here are extremely genetically different from these people over here, but they somewhat look the same, right? And the phenomenon that we're noticing for people that actually read studies and read old craniometric data is that the Australomelanesian type skeleton is one of the best, I guess, examples of early modern. How can I say it without saying they look early modern human? Um, Early fossils look a lot like them, right? Early fossils look a lot like them wherever they are found. The ones in South Africa look sort of like them. The ones in Egypt 35,000 years ago look a lot like them. The ones in Europe look a lot like them. The East Asian ones, virtually all the pre Neolithic ones from Vietnam, Thailand, Japan, China, and people that are watching this, anything I say that you want to source, put a timestamp and say, let me get this source for what you're saying at this timestamp, and I will give you the source. I'm not just talking out my ass. I'm talking based on stuff that I read, and I know exactly where to get the source to say what I'm saying. So if you want the source, say, give me the source, and you'll get the source. So all the early East Asian fossils look like that. Early American fossils look like that, right? And after people came out of Africa, people adapted in situ where they were. And that's what you see. You see early American fossils that look like that, but genetically they are very it's like, oh, it's Native American. The European ones look like this, but European hunter gatherer. And people, number one, they want to shoehorn their own ancestry because these people, of course, look Austro-Melanesians look somewhat like Africans. The patterns overlap. They want to be able to shoehorn themselves into all those groups, and that is why, like, the whole X population was black is is not scientific, and it creates like a path for nefarious people to say the first population in China was black, or the first population in the Americas was black, and using that as an argument that they came directly from Africa, like somewhat recently in evolutionary terms. You know, everybody comes from Africa, but they're not talking about 60,000 years ago. They're saying they came, 6,000 years ago. And that's bogus. But they do it to sell books, and they do it to grift. And that's why certain terms I don't use. But the destruction of race, yeah, you see it with the Natufian fossils. Physically, some of them cluster with West Africans. They don't have West African DNA. We got the DNA from Natufians.
Yeah, they that was somewhat recent. Like, and
Yep.
that kind of reminds me of how I've changed my mind about like certain North Africans. And I
Hmm.
know people will take this and like, you think ancient Egyptians were white? Not necessarily. No, no, no.
What is white?
I think, and that's like, I think race is 100% opinion, and it's opinion used to divide resources. So it
Here's a
becomes
question.
real in that
Here's a
sense.
question. In Egypt, in the pictures of how they drew people, right? The people in the Western Desert that are shown with pale skin and tattoos, are those white people?
I think that they are
The
kind of
one
like
not
the
in the head, and
exception.
they were running down the street naked with
I
pale
think
skin and
they're kind of the
tattoos and
exception
black
because
hair.
by my definition, if I were to see them, I probably would have said that they looked mixed, or I wouldn't have assigned black or white to
But they have pale
I think
skin.
you're talking about like not necessarily the first images of Libyans, but like around Middle
Yes,
Egypt
yeah,
Libyans.
those people with the pale skin and the tattoos.
When you with the primary images of them, sometimes they're not that pale. They start to look a lot
Work with me.
they start to look a lot like Siwa Berbers.
Have
They start to
you
look kind of high yellowish.
do you know any North Africans that have phenotypes that overlap cleanly with Europeans?
Yeah.
Okay, are
Yeah.
Europeans white?
Yes. Like I wouldn't say
Okay,
that about all of them. I'm just talking about like the Libyans and some of the images. Like some of them I probably would say, "Oh, that was a white dude running down the street." With a lot of them I'm like, because I'm more familiar with African tribes and stuff, I would have been like, that's Amazigh, who kind of looks mixed. I don't know what he's doing in America. I would have been more ambiguous.
well,
Um,
I mean,
so yeah,
here's
yeah, like, but that isn't something I like. That kind of goes into the question, like, how have has information changed your mind? Because I would have never thought that white people were indigenous to any part of Africa, and now I'm like, yo, you got Africa's producing people like you've seen some of the PCA plots of ancient
yes,
Europeans where they move
yes,
where they're closer to Africans.
yes.
So I'm like, well, in between the Spain and the Central Republic of the Congo, you have a big range of possibilities where you
Yeah.
could produce somebody. And so yeah, I'm like, once you start bleeding towards that direction, you start producing people who look more like that.
Right. Here's another one of my bullet points. We need to lose the racial model and start viewing populations in terms of humans, human adaptation, microevolutionary adaptation in the human species, right? And so, why do people have light skin in the first place? Why do people have dark skin? Why is a person's nose thin versus wide? Why is my hair, you know, 4C hair? Why is my hair nappy and this person straight? Once you figure out the specific evolutionary function of those features, it helps you better talk about it and explain things. For instance, I'll give you a case. Hair. One of the latest things they found out about hair is that It's an adaptation. Well, hair like mine is an adaptation to hot, moist areas. You know, black people with curly hair, when it get moist, what does it do? It frizzes up, right? And the function of that is to cool the brain, acts as a heat sink. And I mentioned this researcher before, Tina Lasisi. She defended her thesis during the pandemic. It was pretty good. They created like a robot, and they put like hair on it and did all these tests with water, and that was her whole conclusion. One important thing that she found is some of the specific genes for hair curl are derived, not ancestral. That means um, it's hypothesized that our earliest ancestor, when it lost its hair, or like our earliest ancestors, like chimpanzees and primates, they have straight hair, right? And our earliest ancestor probably had straight hair. And then
Well,
as humans moved around and our specific ancestors went into equatorial Africa, they developed the gene that makes your hair curl. Those that did not go into a hot, humid place did not get that gene. So here we go back to North Africa. People say, oh, those people must be mixed because they have straight hair. Well, guess what? Straight hair is the ancestral state. Why should they have curly hair if they inhabit a region that is hot and dry and not hot and humid?
I,
Why
I don't think
do they
that's
have
that
that?
controversial because of eyebrow hair.
It's controversial for people that want to make it seem like everyone that looks a certain way is new, and everyone that has a certain feature must have came from somebody else or somewhere else,
Because
right?
from what I've seen, most like Africans of that have curly hair on their head,
Mhm.
like close to 4C or in that range, they might not. They tend to have straighter eyebrows than Arabians. So it, I get how it would be controversial to other people, but I'm like, if all of these people down near have straight hair on one part of their body, then the idea of it being derived from something that was different in our ancestral period shouldn't be that controversial. And then,
But
of
people want
course,
to
you
be
have
the
pubes.
original. We the original. They want to be the original and act like the features that they have are the original when maybe that's not the case, right? We have
Yeah.
dark skin. We have genes for extra dark skin, right?
And we also have like the most light skin diversity whenever it's tested.
There you
So
go. So,
I'm I
you know,
that's an area where I've kind of changed my mind too. Is I would not have thought, wow, Africans have more light skin diversity than Eurasians.
but
But then I also see a lot of light skin diversity in dark skin Eurasians, even though they're much less diverse
mhm.
genetically, which I have no explanation for. That to me is weird.
But
But
it's the dilemma, right? It's the dilemma that people don't want to face, that some a group of people that they want to call foreign to make some racial claim over an area have features that may precede theirs, and people are not quite ready for that. They want to say, oh, these people, those people with that skin color, they're new, but they are not quite ready to understand that they live in an environment that maybe favored those light skin genes, right? You have the DNA where we have not found a specific, well, yet a specific gene, light skin gene for North Africans. They found some for South Africans, but not for North Africans. The one that they have that we found is derived from West Asians. So, that's the evidence. But in the future, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be
yeah,
surprised.
I kind of lost my train. I had another question because I was thinking about like with how you do see something similar with skin color, um, but you also, because I remember I did a video where I talked about how the the prevalence of the vitiligo gene
Hmm.
argues that dark skin is derived from an old school state when we look like Chaka from Land of the Lost. We might have been, we might have, I think back then, like the Homo habilis days, we were probably um, multicolored in the way that a lot of primates are.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. We were light. We lost skin a million years ago, and then by the time Homo sapien sapien rolls around, the ancestral state in Homo sapien sapien, us, is dark.
Yeah, I I did a video about that a while back, and I don't really remember my sources, but it just seemed like most things were lining up with that. Um, and that's and like and I guess one thing that I'm remembering that where I lost my train of thought was when you talk about like the origins of light skin in North Africa,
Hmm.
it, you're going to be surrounded by people who will seize on that and be like, yeah, Egyptians were Berbers. And
Some of them were.
that, well, there's Berbers, see why they're now. But
You go.
the the issue I have with that is the hotbed for Berbers is pretty far from Egypt. Um, so it's like they're shoehorning that narrative, but they don't know how to shoehorn it, and they don't know like kind of the pitfalls. And that reminds me of what I wanted to ask about the Boris study, because that and I haven't fully read it, flipping through it, and I'm like, oh, it's showing that this Anatolian farmer ancestry was it's found in East Africans, and in their mapping where um where they're showing where it started, and their map is only showing like the very top of North Africa up. It's
Hmm.
not present in old Europe like 15,000
Hmm.
years ago, but it is present in the Levant, Egypt, and Libya. So that's
Okay.
where it's like you have some game if you're talking about people who are related to Berbers populating the uh, Lower Egypt and other places and all that, but it's still coming through an African siphon.
Berbers are African, right? I think I think people make the mistake of looking at Egypt as being populated by one thing and not seeing them as people who have multiple lines of ancestry, right? So Berber, they're known by the Berber marker, EM81. Is that found in Egypt? Yes, it is. You know, M1 and U6, are those found in Egypt? Yes, they are. They are. They were there pharaohs that were Berber? Yes, there were. When you reconstruct Egyptian place names, right? Looking at what the Egyptians wrote using other people's languages and just sort of writing it out, you find when they describe places and people to the south and west of them, Cushitic, Chadic, and Berber, and Nile Saharan. So the people were there, right? The modern people are there. They still have Berber speakers. The question is, what do and you can ask the same thing of Egyptian Cushitic speakers that live in the southeast. How Egyptian Cushitic people that live in the southeast, the Nilo-Saharan people that live in the south and the southwest, the more Levantine people in the Sinai, right? All these different groups, who contribute the most, and where in Egypt do you see the poles start to shift, right? Genetically, that's what that's really what it's about. Not were Berbers there, was white people there, or once you start using the term white and black, like science just goes out the window, and people start posting like pictures, and it's like, man, that's kindergarten stuff to me. To me, talk about a person black. Do they have dark skin? Right? What are the evolutionary forces? And what's the mean annual temperature and the ultraviolet radiation in that specific part of the world? Would indigenous people there be required to have dark skin to protect themselves from the harmful sun? It's like a yes or no question. It's an easy yes or no question. And if we have skeletons from this area and we dig up, test them for DNA, did they have the ancestral state for dark skin? In the case of 7,000-year-old Moroccans and 15,000-year-old Moroccans and 13,000-year-old Natufians, yes, they did. That's how you answer the question, in my opinion.
Um, and this is like something I talked to you about earlier today. Because my thing when it comes to what people look like, I've heard, and I'm trying to give Egyptologists the benefit of the doubt, but I heard an Egyptologist, and this was a forum
Mm-hmm.
from 2 years ago, and she was asked what ancient Egyptians looked like, and I don't remember the name of the woman that I want to compare her to. I should
Did she
probably
write
just
the
look her up.
Good King?
Good King.
No, the good.
She looked like this Lebanese lady who used
Oh,
to
she was not an
criticize.
American.
Nah, I
Okay,
think she was an Egyptian.
okay.
Like, but she said that they probably look like her, or different variations, different colors of her.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I to me, that's when it goes back to, you're a little bit kind of pale to to describe people um, who lived in a time when, and I always mention this because I think I've probably showed you this study, if you're familiar with it, that came out
Mm-hmm.
of Greece on the Minoans.
Mm-hmm.
They were shown to be darker than modern Greeks because, like, when you test a modern Greek, unless it's Giannis
They're
Antetokounmpo,
isolated island,
they're
so
light skinned.
dark skin sort of preserved.
Yeah,
That makes
so
sense.
they're not like modern Greeks are not going to be tested and seen as dark skin, but this person, or well, actually, this was a bunch of people they tested. They were reported as dark skin, and when you look at like Minoan art, and I don't think these were true Minoans. These was like sure Picado, they're drawing themselves up pretty dark in
Were you
compare. In
communicating with this woman in the lecture she was giving?
Nah, I would have said I'm skeptical of this because but this is an old video. Like,
Mm. The question is for stuff like this. The question is, where's your source? What is she basing that on? If she is she basing that on fossils that she's seen and she's measured, like what is she basing it on? Is that just her opinion? So you really can't even challenge it until you know where she is making the claim from.
well, like we both have examples of modern Egyptians that look either like you said with Akhenaten, and you had mentioned this 6 years ago, and you saw someone in Egypt who looked just like Akhenaten, and
Yeah.
I've seen a dark skinned Egyptian who looked just like Hakeem Ayan, who's a chematology dude, who passed away, I think like 2010, 2009, but they look just alike. And one of them would not pass the paper bag test or the whatever color lines we've had in the States, but the other one would.
Here's the question,
But they
right?
look just alike, different colors. So I could see where she was going. I just don't know if I could go there when I'm not sure how far Egypt was from its Cheddarman stage when you still have dark skinned Southern Europeans in the Chalcolithic age.
Okay, so the question for you is when did light skin show up in Africa? What date do we have for that?
That that goes back to that Middle Kingdom Libyan. So
No,
We
No,
know at least
no.
by then. But
Late Neolithic Moroccan. That's the sample that we have. 5,000 years ago. Light skin is already in Morocco.
that ain't that far. Well, 5,000 years ago, Middle Kingdom. Yeah, I mean that
That's
is kind of
unification.
old though.
That's unification. 3,000 BC. Did those people that ended up in Morocco with light skin, did they cross through the Sinai?
Uh,
When does light skin
who
show up in the Middle
knows?
East?
Who knows?
Natufian did not have them. When you look at the and by the way, my hourglass is getting a little low. When you look at
Brought the
the SNP
hourglass.
data for I want to say Natufian, the data that we have, they are ancestral, so they have dark skin, but the um, pre-pottery Neolithic, they're a mix, right? So let's say 9,000 years ago, um, we have evidence for light skin in Levantines. 9,000 years ago, okay. So when is Egypt getting things from the Levant? Anytime
Yeah.
after that? Yes, they are. They got an agricultural package, and they have sheep and goats, and you have Levantine pottery in Egypt. You have Levantine lithics in Egypt. This book talks about arrowheads and isolated sites. You don't have mass migration of people, but you have the presence of people. I want to say Keita in one of his studies talks about the limb proportions of some northern Egyptians being not tropical, indicating they are like from Palestine or something like that. So you have the why can't light skinned people have come into Egypt? I don't like what's the big deal?
I For me, it just goes back to how 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 frequent Europe is tested, and
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
how
Doesn't matter.
you are like
No,
show me some lighter
there's
skinned Europeans.
archaeology of how it could have happened, right? Whether it happened that way or not, we don't know. But that is how it could happen. We know when they were light in Levant, and we know some people came over with some stuff because we even got their bones. So it could have happened.
Yeah.
What's the point?
And then from there it goes to I it doesn't seem like it's stuck in their art. Like when you see
Talking about
a bunch
individuals.
of people
We're not talking
milking
about populations.
images of people milking cows,
Yeah, we talk about individuals. We're not talking about
yeah.
populations.
But when they were discussing that thing in that forum, like if she wanted to say, oh, it ranged from myself to Shaba Ranks and whatever,
I
that
mean,
that is whatever. I'm sure there are
she's
exceptions.
Egyptian though.
I
She
would
gonna
picture
give her
exceptions.
she's gonna give herself the clout, right? And they're gonna say what they say, but as far as I'm concerned, like we need to know the data so we can go back and tell our people, okay, this is what it is. There was an Egyptologist um on on YouTube. I'm sorry I can't share the video, but he was an Egyptologist, right? He was talking about how they were like no Negro skulls in Egypt, and so I'm like, okay. I clicked the video, and he's going over his credentials, and boom, this he went here, and in Egyptology, boom, and he published this book and this book and this book, and I'm looking at the publication like, oh, this looks like some interesting stuff, and then he starts to name the fossils, right? And say, oh, it was this one was Caucasian, this one was Caucasian, this one was Caucasian, but he didn't name any sources. And I'm like, no, I've read the data, right? And so I type a comment and basically say that um, I'm not making the argument because the skeletons look a certain way that means they came from a specific place. I'm not saying that, but you're lying because they don't look like how you're saying they look. They look like this. Now I put the article, DOI number, page number, excerpt. Boom, 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 boom. It went site after site, fossil after fossil. This is where you lied. 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 And this person, as an academic, particularly somebody that claims to be an Egyptologist and they publish in books and stuff, you're not supposed to lie. You're supposed to look at the data and explain what that means in its evolutionary context and how those people are related to you, not lie and say they look this way because it makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside.
So he wasn't
That's
just
what you
doing
have to
like
do.
the anthropology one drop rule. He was going
I
beyond
don't.
that
I
because
don't
I've
know. He
seen
was just
people do
lying.
that.
He was just lying.
Because I've seen
It's
people
just
say
flat out lying. But
uh,
people, if you
a
don't know the
range
data,
of
people will lie to
Caucasian
your
features
face.
equals Caucasian. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
and I'm
silly.
like you can't have if you're measuring 10 things and two of them are lean Caucasian, you can't just say that's Caucasian. I've seen people do that, but you're saying he went
It,
past that.
dude, read the Wikipedia article on like ancient Egypt. It's like, oh my
Yeah,
god. It's like they write it and it'll say, oh, they look like this. And here's the source. And you go and read the source. They didn't look like A, they look like B in the source. Like, who does this stuff? But nobody's gonna click the source. They can just type it up and nobody clicks the link. But I'm gonna click the link because I want the real information. I want the summary. I want to read the data. And it's for us to ignore the BS and not worried about, another one of my bullet points. People talking about white people control everything. White people control this. They do this. They control Egyptology. Egyptology is Eurocentrism. Bullshit. Number one, it's bullshit. They don't control everything. You control yourself. And there are Egyptians out there. There's other Africans digging up this stuff and publishing. And it's not how it used to do. It's not how it used to be. These books tell you what's up. These books look at the measurements and tell you, you know, everyone in the Sahara, the vast majority of the people look like this. And people that look like this only showed up in the late Holocene, right? A book is going to tell you that, and publications are going to tell you that. The other
that
people that don't want you to know are not going to tell you.
that
And
does answer some things because I always say like I'm I've kind of paused it. I'm working on something that I'd like to show you in about 6 months or so, and
Mhm,
I can't really speak on for a lot of reasons. And I'll be glad to when I can get the reasons off my chest where I got to be quiet. But eventually, I'll go back to moving the movie script, and that's when it does become uh, more than like child's play. It's like because then the people are showed on a big screen or they're showed on a book or whatever. Race
mhm,
becomes tangible when it's visible.
mhm,
So you've made the point that there's stuff out there if you read that'll tell you like what they look like, so you can remove some of the assumptions and kind of connect the dots theories. So
mhm.
I'll take that in. I know your hourglass clock is tipping, ticking,
Oh, it's drained.
or actually grain. Oh, yeah, that was quick. You literally had an hourglass, so you would
Now,
mention that. So
um,
I want to give you the final word then.
my final word is we need to read more. It takes time. We need to ask people for sources. I don't know how many times I'll go into a room on the internet, Twitter Live, Clubhouse, whatever, and people are talking about something. They're just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And no one says, what is the source? Right? If you want to know how a population looked, look at the fossils. Someone has already dug them up and they already took the measurements and compared it to the people that you're talking about. And you can just pull that up, look at it. Okay, you're right and you're wrong, and go on. You know, I've seen people argue for hours about something that can be resolved in 5 minutes. So we have to ask people, what's your source? And I'm an administrator of an Egyptology group, and I have what's called the hot seat challenge. You make a claim, I ask you for a source. You got 24 hours. You in the hot seat. Whatever BS you said, you got to prove it. And if you ain't prove it, guess what? You get banned from the group. We don't need people like you in the group that's just making claims out of thin air and cannot prove them. You get banned from the group forever. It may seem cold, but that's where we need to be. A lot of people just are not serious, and they don't even try to be serious. It's just like, people talking, and it ends
What's
up
what's the
fine.
craziest source somebody tried to put out there to stick?
No, no source,
Really? So
no
they don't
source.
even try.
They don't even try.
So
They don't even try.
we didn't get the. They don't even go to the New Nuwabians.
It's you're dealing with people that it's like layers, right? Some people know how to make cornflakes. Some people have like a good bread recipe, and other people, they know how to cook. They know how to cook, and other people really they know the science of cooking, right? The biological process and the chemical process of the yeast in the dough, right? And the laws of, I'm stealing this. I'm not making this up. The laws of thermodynamics and heating the bread, and how if in a different part of the world at a higher elevation, you have to heat it to a different temperature, or else A, B, and C. Like it's a whole bunch that like layers that you can get into, and a lot of people are just at surface layers, but they want to hop into the deep end of the discussion, and that is the problem. People hopping in at the deep end of the discussion and making videos, and it's just not a good look. It's not a good look. Afrocentricity is not, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. If there's a battle going on, we are losing. We got slingshots and they got stealth bombers.
Yeah, I think and it's ironic because in this whole equation, the main people who are Afrocentric are the people we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's like the ancient Egyptians themselves.
Yeah.
So it's like
And as
it
far
it,
as
it
I'm concerned, right, Egyptology is, it's very Afrocentric. When I say Afrocentric, I mean African centered. I'm not talking about black people and white people. Um, it's like that whole dynastic race, that shit is out the window. All this stuff they finding is very clear that the people in that region did everything. Yeah, there were migrations and Saharans and all that, but the cultures and stuff is very local, right? And when I'm conversating with people and they say, "Oh, they came from blah blah blah," I'll say, "Which culture?" Badarians. Okay, show me an archaeological study where they find Badarian culture anywhere outside of Egypt, and you can't. You can't, right? And that's where like the rubber meets the road. People are like just talking and saying stuff, and no, you can't just say anything. You have to use science and talk about specific material cultures, where they were found, where they went, and not just make up ideas of people from sub-Saharan Africa bringing cattle to into Egypt when Egyptians domesticated cattle, and it's found in Egypt thousands of years before it even comes to the south.
yeah.
My closing, um, I would suggest a really good thesis by Eric Becker. It is called "The Prehistoric Inhabitants of the Wadi Howar." The Wadi Howar was the Yellow Nile. It's actually one of the most important tributaries into the Nile Valley before it dried up. More important than the White Nile, more important than the Blue Nile. And it is in Sudan, and it ran from like Sudan to, I don't know, Lake Chad or something, or all through the Sahara when the Sahara was green. Yeah, the prehistoric inhabitants of Wadi Howar, an anthropological study on human skeleton remains from the Sudanese part of the Eastern Sahara. The good thing about this study is it has a lot of samples. When I say a lot, I mean a lot. A lot of Saharan samples, a lot of Sudanese samples, a lot of Nubian Egyptian samples, and it really puts things into context. And if you want to know how physically how some of these populations looked, it does that and it compares them to modern people. I don't want to give it all up, but it's surprising what you find. And it's surprising how many people do not know this. So
I'll
that
raise my
that's
hand.
a study I'll
Eric
leave.
Becker,
Eric Becker,
Becker,
B E CKER. It is a thesis, so it's like 1,300 pages long, but
It's not that
um,
long.
I'll make things easy for you and give you some key pages that I
I
thought
say
were
that's not that
important.
long, but I'm like, yo, that's like 4 books.
Well, most of that is like
But
300 pages, and the rest is
yeah,
like 1,000 pages of comparative data. But
got
some
you.
of the pages I found important were pages 59, 60, 63, 64, 65, 72, 73, 79, 224, 234, 235, 266, 267, 296, 347, and 358. If you read that, you'll be like, oh, okay. Okay. It puts a lot of stuff in perspective and let you know who was doing what. And it also has dental data. And we didn't even mention the abstract of the new study where they have a Southern Egyptian, quite old, I believe it was Old Kingdom.
Oh,
Did you see that?
um, of dental data.
Well, the study was DNA,
Oh, of
and
Old Kingdom.
it basically, yep, Old Kingdom, Southern Egypt. I think it was Fourth Dynasty, maybe. I could be wrong. Don't quote me.
When
It
did this
basically
come out?
said
Because I haven't seen it.
when it leaked less than 2 weeks ago.
Oh, no wonder.
It
Because I
said
that I'm all over.
the individual was very Natufian like. I believe even more so than Abu Sir, and it did not have the I want to say the Caucasus hunter gatherer or Iranian type component.
Almost like a pure Natufian.
Maybe. And then they said they were looking at dental data, and what they found comparing dental data with genetic data is within Africa, there is a good correlation with dental data and genetic data. And so, and other people have said this, in lieu of genetic data of ancient samples that you don't have, maybe you can look at dental data. And this study has a lot of dental data. And you'll read it and you'll smile and you'll frown. That's it.
Cool. Well, I appreciate it. I'd like to do this again, and not in 6 years, but
Well,
we both kind
it's
of
been more than
busy.
6 years. The pandemic with
Ah,
Pro and
oh yeah. Oh, that was wasn't that before? No, that was during the pandemic.
that's during the pandemic. He was
Yep.
he was in Wuhan fighting it off, saving the world.
Yeah. Damn, what is he up to? Well, either way, let's get on a panel later. But we're busy. We got
Oh,
things to do. I
yeah,
appreciate it though.
yep. My I have a website, astonb.com. I don't post a whole bunch, but I post a little bit. Um, People know where to find me. My DMs are always open. What was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about starting a podcast or like a YouTube thing, but I don't um I don't really want to compete with what's out there, number one. And if I do it, it's going to be like real boring and nerdish, right? Like the Waddy Howard data, when I'm telling you some of those pages, it would basically be something like that. And you have to find an individual or individuals that are as interested in it as you are to really get together and um, what's the word? Motivate each other to make something like that happen. Because one thing I have noticed is the type of community that you're really looking for, where people are really digging in the books and stuff like that, it does not exist.
Hmm. Yeah. It I can't name one.
It
Um,
doesn't
but
exist.
I think you don't sell your don't I want to say sell yourself out. Have you said uh but it wouldn't be that boring. Like it's don't sell yourself short, I should say, because
Boring.
I think a lot of times we have conversations that people would find really interesting. Um, and it's not just people who are curious because they are like kind of nerdy. Because
Hmm.
I take a lot of this in, and I'm like, we need to do a video game that's super accurate, like pre-dynastic Elden Ring. Yeah.
Make
So
a Roblox game, man.
I'm serious. Like, would somebody please build a model that's based on skull measurements? Like that should be that hard because they did that one game that was a like Assassin's Creed
Yeah,
version in Egypt, and it just seemed like all they did was give the standard model a good hard tan,
yeah.
and then they made some standard looking black people and called them
Well,
Nubians.
why do you say that though? Why do you say that? Like,
I
what?
haven't played the game, so I could be wrong, but that seemed like what you had but that was also during a later era,
Hmm.
so that wouldn't have been totally inaccurate in that era. But I didn't see that those long um, skulls and the prognatism that you see more from earlier eras
But you
in
got to
what little
remember,
bit of the game I've seen.
and this paper will go into it. You have to look at some of this stuff in terms of adaptation, right? Um, what's the best way I can put it? Certain features we don't quite know about yet. You know, prognatism, for instance, right? If you have a collection of skulls and you can put the ones of the most and the ones that are the least, like towards the flattest face scale, it would be the Somali, which have less prognatism than many Nubians and ancient Egyptian samples. Flatter than Nakata, flatter than Badarian, flatter than like most of the Nubian samples are the Somali. Why is that? If they can be modeled as 50% sub-Saharan African, right?
I would
There
say
are
that's just how God made them.
right, but there's a reason for that, and there is some adaptation for that, and nose and things like that. I remember data where you have populations with arid adapted features, right? The function of the thin nostrils and the high nose bridge is to warm or condition the air as it enters your naval cavity and goes into the lungs. At least that's what they say. And so people that live in cold, wet places and people that live in hot, arid places have a very similar adaptation with that nose bridge. So if you like live in the mountains or you live in the desert, over time that is the type of skeleton that makes sense, right? And so there's a reason why those people look like that.
So, like
That's the
an
reason.
adaptation
So
where
you know, you have to look at the function of the feature, and then it starts to make sense. And if people move from there into like the Great Lakes region, if they're in the lowlands and it's hot and dry, they'll probably preserve those features, right? They would probably preserve straighter hair unless they're mixing with some other groups. If they went into Ethiopia and you now you're in the highlands and it's cool and stuff, it would make sense that those people keep those features. They would favor that environment, and so certain things make sense. And when you look at older fossils, you can find old fossils in East Africa that are more like that, more so than any Egyptian fossil, modern or ancient, right? If you think that's like Caucasoid, well, these are more Caucasoid than all the Caucasoids. So it seems as people a long time ago when that adaptation came into play, some people went through under some extreme pressures to really be like a maxed out version of that, like you see with Southern Sudanese with the tropical limbs, where they are just like extremely long, right? Um, So yeah, yeah, you have to get into the science. You have to look at populations like that. Otherwise, you're just playing a whole bunch of race games and talking about discrete types and racial percentages and all that nonsense. It's nonsense.
Cool.
But let's end there.
Great. All right.
All right,
I am going to end the broadcast entirely. So I just want to
and
say
I'll
goodbye.
be in the chat. People asking questions. I like answering questions.
Cool. All right. Take it easy.
Peace, everybody.
Peace.
Read books.